Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to Kokoro Live. I am so glad that you could join us this evening. My name is Alex Lang, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. And I just want to say thank you for coming back. If you did, last week we had a few technical glitches, and this week we're doing better. I think we got everything set up the way that it should be, so I'm really looking forward to interacting with you. If you don't mind, I'd really love to be able to see who's here. If you could just talk in the chat a little bit, that would be really helpful, just so that I could kind of see who's present. And I want to get started today by talking to you about, we're gonna look at the concept of kindness, which I know sounds maybe like an odd thing, but I really think kindness is in short supply in our world today in kind of huge ways. And so we're gonna mine the concept of kindness, and then we're gonna talk about why it's in short supply, and ultimately we're gonna get into this idea of how we can cultivate kindness in our lives. So to begin, I actually want to show you a video. And the thing is that I'm a big fan of Hidden Brain on NPR. And that show is a show that deals with psychology and all kinds of different things. And they did a spinoff, which is called My Unsung Hero. Now, My Unsung Hero, what it does is people talk, they write in about some hero that's in their life. And I came across one that absolutely blew me away. Now, I figured that I could tell you the story, or I could play you the audio, but I did one even better. Some of you may know that I really enjoy doing film. And because I love doing film, I will often, if I have the opportunity and I can go film something, I like doing shorts, I will go out and do a short film. And so I heard this and I was like, you know what, I want to turn this into a short. So what I want to do is I want to show you this particular film, and we're going to use this as the launching point for what we're talking about today. So I hope you enjoy.
I was surprised to find that when I walked through the hallway, none of my friends would make eye contact with me. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with me. Not teachers, not friends, not teammates. Every once in a while, as I was walking to my first class, somebody would have this half wave where it barely even crossed their chest. If I was lonely walking into that school, now my sadness and despondency only amplified. And in that hallway, the most unlikely of supports walked over to me. Jeff Paget, a football player on the team with me, a guy that was definitely not in my social group. And he put his arm around me. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Hey, I heard about your mom. How are you doing?" And he looked me right in the eye. And Jeff said, "Listen, let me walk you to class." And I was almost in tears. And it sounds really intimate and emotional. And at 13, in 1987, it was. Just the idea that someone saw me, was willing to acknowledge that there was some grief inside me that was unresolved. And as we walked through the hallway, it was as if I had this invisible protective shield that made me feel a little bit more strong and that I could get through this. And when I got to class, he just patted me on the shoulder as if he did nothing and then walked off. And the unfortunate thing is, Jeff Paget died, and it was that moment last year that I realized I never thanked him, and he never knew how much I thought about him and how much of an impact he had on my life.
So, first of all, I just want to say thanks to all the people who helped bring that together. There was a number of friends who I had who kind of helped me get the students for that and for the actors and everything. So it was actually a lot of fun putting that together. But in case you didn't get to see the whole thing, basically Todd Kashdan, who's the one who did that unsung hero, he was a teenager. His mother died, and as you could see from the video, he comes into school, and it's like nobody knows how to talk to him. Nobody knows how to even address him. Like, as you could see, he's walking in. The teachers don't know what to do. The students don't know what to do. And to be fair, some of this has to do with the fact that we as a society, we've actually become really detached from death. If you even think about it, like, even in 1900, death was all around. Babies died very young because there wasn't modern medicine. You could die from an infection. Women died in childbirth all the time. There was just a lot more death present in your life. And we live in a very unique time in human history. This is the first time ever that we are in a position where we have the ability to make sure that most people don't die. And so death has been separated from us. And as you could tell from that whole video, the story, we don't really know what to do anymore. But he gets in there, and as you could see, Jeff Paget walks up to him, and he's the only person who has any concern for Todd. And all he asks is, "How are you doing?" And walks him to his class. And that little bit of kindness is something that he remembered for the rest of his life. And I think this is really instructive for us, because so often we think of kindness as something that has to be big things. We can think of the fires that are going on right now out in California. And those fires are huge. People have lost their homes, people have lost their lives, and the kindness that we need to show to those people, that's a big deal. We need to give them housing. We need to make sure that they have the things that they need to get by. But oftentimes, the things that we remember in our lives, the things that can change the trajectory of our lives, it's little, small moments where somebody is kind, and you don't even realize, I'm sure that Jeff Paget had no idea that little moment meant so much to Todd. He probably wouldn't even remember it necessarily. So the fact that that moment really helped Todd through that time, I think it's instructive about what kindness can do for people. So at this point, I want to stop for a second, and I want to ask you, what are some moments in your life when people showed you a little bit of kindness in a moment where you really needed it? And so if you're willing to write that into the chat, I'd like to know. Again, I'll ask you, what are some moments in your life when people showed you a little bit of kindness in a moment where you really needed it? Now, while you're typing your answer, I want to tell you about a moment in my life where somebody showed me a great deal of kindness. So when I was, as many of you know, I was a pastor. I moved here, and in about my 5th year, there was a small group of people who really kind of were angry at me. They felt that I wasn't orthodox enough or that I wasn't spiritual enough. And I had just kind of gotten wind that this group was angry and upset. And I was going to do a wedding one weekend, and I knew that one of the ringleaders of this was going to be at the wedding. That in fact, that this person was actually going to, it was close friends with the parents of the bride. And I was really kind of upset because I knew this person was going to be here, and I assumed that because they were close friends, that they held the same beliefs. And so I came into this wedding rehearsal and I was just not in a good place. And I wasn't really treating the situation with any deference. And I kind of was saying things that implied that people were angry and upset and all these things. And eventually, one of the parents turns to me and says, Alex, just so you know, we really like you. And we're super honored that you're doing our daughter's wedding. Thank you for doing that for us. We just think it's a great thing. And it was just this little moment, this little thing. And I remembered it because in that place, in that time, I was struggling so much to feel like anybody liked me. I thought perhaps nobody thought I was any good. And what ended up happening was that little comment changed my trajectory. It made me realize, oh, actually, there's a lot of people who like me. And even the people who are connected to this group, a lot of the people who are connected to those people like me and think well of me. And so it was enough for me to say, okay, like, I'm doing okay here. Like, yes, there are some people who don't like me as much, but you know what? That's okay. And I'm going to be all right. And it helped me go forward with it. Now, not having seen anybody put anything in the comments, I'm going to jump forward and I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of kindness in our lives, like where kindness comes from. So I think that what's interesting, and you may agree or disagree with this, but I think this is true, is that I think for all people, you're born either with a natural disposition to be kind, or you're not as kind. Like you're just born with less disposition towards kindness. Maybe you're a little bit more selfish. And I think that you have this disposition and then you have your environment. These are two things that kind of go hand in hand when we're talking about kindness. So I want to give you an example. So let's say that you are born with a kind disposition, but you are raised in an environment which values maybe lying, cheating, stealing. That's common. So that actually happens in all kinds of places all over the world where you have these types of environments where you have to work really hard to get by, and it's not a simple thing. So if you're born with a kind disposition and you're in that environment and then you're kind to people, more often than not, those people will take advantage of you. And so eventually kindness will be seen as a weakness. And if you get hurt as a result of being kind, what are you going to learn? You're going to learn to stuff down all of that kind nature because you realize, oh my gosh, if I do this, then I'm going to get hurt. People are going to take advantage of me. So in that instance, you have somebody who is kind, the environment teaches them not to be. And so in the best case scenario, what those people learn is, I need to be kind to people who I trust. So they learn to trust people. In the worst cases, they don't trust anyone, and then they just absolutely, totally eject the kindness that's inside of them. Now let's flip this around. Let's go a different direction with this. So let's say that you're born with an unkind disposition, or you're a little bit more selfish. Now, if you're born with that disposition, and then you're born into an environment that values kindness, where you're expected to be polite, where you're socially ostracized if you are not kind. Well, that person is going to learn how to be kind, even though it's not part of their nature. They're going to do that because it's going to be really hard for them to get by otherwise. So in those environments, what they'll do is they'll shove it aside and then they'll say, you know what, I'm going to be nice, I'm going to be kind, because if I'm not, then the whole situation will tumble down for me. And so they learn the ability to do things for other people that they wouldn't naturally do, but over time they do it because they know that it's going to benefit them. It's a mutually beneficial thing that ultimately by helping them, other people will help them. So in a sense, it allows them to do better. Now, I grew up in an interesting environment. In my environment, I grew up in a household where I was taught it was very, very important for you to be kind to people out in the world. So you had to be polite all the time. So when I would go out with my mom and dad, if I met anybody, whether it was somebody we knew or was a stranger, I was expected to be uber polite to them. Uber polite. But And if I wasn't, I would get literally chastised right there on the spot. Like there was just no way about it. I would literally get yelled at. Now, that was the expectation when we go out. That same kindness, however, was not always shown at home. At home, there would often be arguments, or there would be other things that were happening. And so you kind of had this disparity going on, right? Whereas on the outside, we were saying, oh, there's all these people, like we have to be kind to everyone. But then internally in the household, we weren't as kind to each other. Now, to be fair, this is true of a lot of people who we know, right? Everybody who you know in the world, they have two kind of ways of being. So there's the ways that they present to the world, and then there's a way that they present to other folks, to the people they know who are close to them. So the people who know you really well, they know the real you, right? Like they know who you are as a person. And who you are as a person, hopefully you're somebody who is really, your disposition is consistent between who you are outside and inside. For me, what I noticed was that because there was this inconsistency between what I experienced out in the world and what I experienced in my household, that I really valued that consistency in my friendships. And so for me, when I wanted to see that in the world. And so I think this is one reason why I eventually got into church work, is because I wanted to be around people who value kindness. Now, if you've ever been in the church, you probably know that that's kind of crazy, right? Because the church is just a reflection of the world. Like the church has some really kind people and the church has some really unkind people. But what I found to be interesting about the church is you would think in the church, because the whole premise of it is that you have all these ethics that you're being taught all the time. And you would think that that would transform and mold the behaviors of the people who were in the church. But the truth is that often it did not. Like the people who were kind were often very kind, and the people who were unkind stayed that way. And that's fascinating because, as you know, one of the basic tenets of the Christian faith is love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't matter who your neighbor is, you're supposed to love them. Well, the fact is that, even though that's a basic tenet, and Christianity is not the only religion that has this, a lot of religions do. The fact is that you would think that it would change the way people operate and act. And so the question that I want to ask you is, are you a naturally kind person? Yes or no? And what did your environment growing up teach you about kindness? So if you're willing to write that in the chat, I'd be really interested to hear what it is that you were taught. Like, are you a naturally kind person? Yes or no? What did your environment teach you about kindness when you were growing up? So talk to me about that. I'd like to know. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about my own situation. So when I was younger, I personally like to think of myself as having a naturally kind disposition. And I'll give you an example of how my kindness came out. So I had a friend when I was younger, and he and I would play all the time. And he had this radio he had this radio, he had this tape recorder, and the fact is that one day it broke so that he couldn't listen to it in the same way anymore. And I felt really bad for him. And so I decided that I was going to spend my money that I had saved up to go out and buy him this little radio tape player from Radio Shack. It was probably like 30 or 40 bucks. And I spent most of my money on that so that he could have that, because I didn't want him not to have that thing. I thought it was just really important to give him that because he needed it. So I was willing to do that and willing to sacrifice that because I thought that that was an important thing to do. And again, I'm interested in your perspective. Are you a naturally kind person? Yes or no? I've answered kind of my own way. What did your environment teach you about kindness when you were growing up? Now, I will tell you that when I was, and I'm waiting for you in the chat with this, so if you're willing to type that out, I'd love to see. I can see it right now, so please feel free to type it in. For For me though, I remember that when I started doing club swimming. So I started doing swimming, and I was with a bunch of guys, and these guys were really good guys. They were nice guys. But the truth is that, they would bust each other's chops. And if you were weak, they would kind of come at you. And for me, right, initially coming in, because I was like super kind, I can tell you that they took advantage of that. And they would just like dog on me constantly. And so what I learned was in that environment that I had to suppress my kindness in that environment. I could be kind in other places, but I shouldn't be kind there because it was going to come back to bite me. And in some ways it really toughened me up. Like I wasn't used to giving like good comebacks to anything. I wasn't used to doing any of that. But I realized that I had to set my kindness aside in that environment if I was going to kind of survive what it was that they were kind of dishing out towards me. So again, if you're watching, and I'm interested to know, are you that naturally kind person? Yes or no? And what did your environment teach you about kindness when you were growing up? Now, another aspect of, the kindness another aspect of kindness that I want to talk about is this issue of consistency. So for me, like I told you that me being consistent was really important part of my life. Like I really wanted to be consistent inside and outside. So if I was going to be kind inside, I want to be consistent outside as well. And what I noticed when I was growing up is this inconsistency in my life, like that wasn't there. And you all know what that's called, this inconsistency. It's the best way to think about it is that it's being a hypocrite. Now that word hypocrite, it comes from the Greek word hypokritos, and that literally means actor. But the other way that you can say it is it means to wear masks, because Greek actors, they would wear masks when they were on stage. So they had the person who they were, and then they would put the mask on, like so, and they would become a completely different character. So by wearing the mask, they would be something else. So on the outside, you would see one person with the mask, and on the inside, they would be somebody else. This is what it means to be a hypocrite. It means to wear masks in your life. And so, for me, I really wanted to make sure, because I saw the difference between those two things in my life as I was growing up, I wanted to make sure that I was going to remove those masks from my life. Now, I'm interested to know, for you, are there places where you are inconsistent? Are there places where you wear masks in your life, where the person who you are on the inside is different from the person you present on the outside? So I'm interested to know that. If you want to talk about it in the chat, we absolutely can. For me, I will tell you about an inconsistency I had to deal with, because I'm certainly not perfect in this regard. So when I was younger, I very much valued the concept of morality. I wanted to be a very moral, upstanding person. That mattered to me. And, I have a perfectionistic streak inside of me. And so I think that that's where a lot of this came from, was the desire to be perfect. And when I was young, I very much held other people up to that standard, where I wanted other people to be like me. I wanted them to value the things that I valued. I wanted them to be morally upstanding. And if they didn't, I would judge them. But over time, what I realized is that A, I'm not perfect. And B, it's not right for me to hold other people to my standards. So yes, I work very hard. Yes, I want to do things appropriately and properly. But the truth is that that's for me. It shouldn't be for other people. And that's a place where I was being a hypocrite, that if I ever fell below my standards, right, how could I hold other people to the things I was asking them to do? So I realized I needed to take that mask off, and I just needed to be myself. And in that way, I was actually, really honestly being a better human being than I had been in the past. Now, not seeing anything with the masks and being inconsistent, I'm going to move on to kind of the last part of this, which is that I think that there's an interesting question within this of, if what we see today is that there are a lot of people who are actually very consistent, that rather than being, kind on the outside and mean on the inside, that in fact that the way that people are is that some people are mean and they actually like being consistent. They're mean on the outside, mean on the inside. And for those type of people, that's a very sad thing that we are in that position as a society. But if you are the other way, if you're somebody who presents different on the outside than you are on the inside, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, why is that the case? Why do I wear the mask and I want people to see me one way, but then I act differently when I'm alone by myself or I'm with people who know me? And I think that part of the reason why we're moving away from that as a society, where people are just kind of being consistently mean across the board, is because what we're seeing is that we have become highly individualistic. So if the whole point of this episode is to understand ways that we can cultivate kindness in our lives, we have to understand why we as a society have become less kind. So Robert Putnam, who is a Harvard sociologist, political scientist, he talks about this idea of how that our society, it moves back and forth between it's a pendulum between being very communalistic and very individualistic. And our pendulum has been swinging heavily towards the individualistic side for the last, we've been moving towards that for the last 60 years. The last time we were this individualistic was in 1890. And then we swung back towards the communalism, which was really important because, we ended up fighting World War I, we ended up having the Great Depression, we ended up going through World War II. These are things where we all needed to come together and really help each other. And what you can see from that is that the peak of that was in the 1960s. Then the pendulum started to swing back towards individualism. Now, when you value individualism, what that means is that kindness is really seen as a weakness. Kindness is something that tears you down, because if you value your individual self and your individual prosperity, then how are you going to be able, why would you be kind to another person? Why would you take that time? Because the truth is that if it's all about your prosperity, kindness isn't necessarily going to get you there. It can do some things for you, but generally speaking, you're not going to be as kind. And so what ends up happening, what's fascinating, is that kindness is really born out of community. It's born out of friction. It's born out of conflict. So I'll give you an example. So when my sons were young, when they were little kids, they would often wrestle and fight with each other. And what's interesting about them being young is that, when they would wrestle, one of them would get hurt and they would start crying and the other one would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," right? Not fully understanding what they had done to the other one. But then they would wrestle again and then the other one would get hurt. And in doing that, what's interesting is that friction, that conflict, what it did was it actually created empathy for them, because that empathy was something that they realized, oh, I hurt you, and you ended up in that, and I hurt you. I didn't realize what that was like, and then you hurt me. So now I have a great deal more empathy. So I see here we have Kessie Art. You said, "I think I am kind because the way I was raised was very similar to you." That's interesting. So I'd be interested to hear more about your perspective on kind of was the way that you were raised, was that the outwardly you had to be kind to other people, and then inwardly the situation was kind of maybe more turbulent at home where people weren't kind to each other? And I'm interested to know if you're willing to tell me kind of, did it bother you that there was that inconsistency? Or did you see that from an early age? And did you personally strive to kind of change that in your life? Are you living your life differently than you were raised? I'm interested to know that. While I'm waiting for your answer, I'm just going to continue on with what I'm saying. And then I'll see you when you kind of chime in, which is to say that I was talking about how conflict is really at the center of the center of us being able to learn empathy and sympathy and compassion, because it is through that friction, it's through being in conflict with other people that you really do end up finding your empathy, your sympathy, your compassion. You need to be in friction because it's resolving that difference that brings you empathy. Because if I'm going to resolve that difference, I have to understand what the other side is thinking. I have to be able to understand what they're feeling, and I have to put myself in their shoes in order to do that. So it is through conflict. If you don't have conflict, it's never really you're never really going to build empathy up, which I just think is kind of a fascinating aspect of. It's really a fascinating aspect of it, because you would think, oh, you are born maybe naturally kind, but the truth is that if you really want to build that muscle, I mean, the way that you cultivate kindness is it has to be built up. It's something that you have to work on. It's just like lifting weights. You have to be willing to invest in being able to kind of work through that kindness, which means being in community. Like, you need to be part of a community, and you need to be kind of toe-to-toe or shoulder-to-shoulder with people. And then you kind of need to get into some conflict so that you're willing to work through it. And I know that that's a crazy thing to think, and it's a crazy thing to kind of realize, but it's absolutely true that is the case. And you're saying... Yeah. So now you're a therapist, which is totally awesome. And, I think that's really cool. It's nice that, you've taken that kindness and you've moved that kindness out to people who really need to, who probably don't feel heard or listened to, and that you can provide them with the wisdom to be able to live their lives in the best way possible. I mean, I would wonder, and I don't know if you're willing to tell me this, but, and I know it's hard within the chat to do this, but do you feel that your kindness is a real asset in doing your therapy? Because I know that for me, when I was doing my counseling as a pastor, when people would come to me, my kindness and my patience are something that I really put into play, because I wanted to make sure that people felt heard and listened to, and that they knew that essentially that I cared for them. Now, I had some limitations on what I could do. You have a whole other set of training that I don't even have. So you have the ability to kind of maybe address issues in ways that I can't. But I am interested to know, does your kindness really make a difference in the way that your patients see you, in the way that they feel that they're treated by you? Do you feel like they give you that they're more trusting of you as a result of the kindness that you show to them? And I'm really interested to see that, because I know that for me, what's interesting in the pastoral world, at least when I was a part of it, is that I actually met a lot of pastors who weren't good at that. I met a pastor who actually told me at one point, he actually said to me, he goes, Alex, I hate it when people come to my office and waste my time talking to me about their problems. And I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe he was actually saying that to me out loud. It kind of blew me away. I mean, part of the reason why you become a pastor, I assume, is that you're willing to get into the lives of other people. But he really hated it when he had to deal with people who had problems, and that, in his opinion, were wasting his time. So for me, I mean, I very much got into it to be able to serve people who were in need and needed help. So, I think that my disposition was a real benefit to me, and I think it's the reason why ultimately people came and saw me and were willing to invest their time in telling me secrets about their lives. And I think that's also another part of this too, is that, as a therapist, I know people have to trust you. I mean, yes, you have a code of conduct and ethics and all of those things, but there's a deep sense of trust that I think comes out of kindness, that when somebody is more harsh or more, they don't show the same level of empathy, that they're not going to trust you as much. They're not going to invest in you with those secrets. And it's always incredible to me, the things that people have been holding on to, the things that people will tell me. And I am very interested to know for you, if that again, is that something that you find to be true in your own life. So until I see you kind of come up again with another thing, I'm going to jump on to kind of like my last little bit here, which is I think being kind. Oh no, I do. Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting about your profession, and I have seen this to be true as well, is that, sometimes though you have to have like real talk with people. So sometimes you have to sometimes you do have to confront an issue, and you have to be open about some of the things that are going wrong. So I'll give you, as an example, if you come across somebody who is exhibiting serious mental illness, or they're moving into kind of maybe even psychosis, and you realize what's going on, and you're like, oh, we need to, I want to encourage this person to be able to seek better help. So maybe they need the help of a psychiatrist, where they really actually need medication, or maybe they need to go to some type of inpatient type therapy. I think that those sometimes that's the ability to say that in a way that people can hear is really, really critical, because if you can do it in a kind way, if you can do it in a way that people can hear it, they're going to be a lot more likely to be able to take that next step. And I'm sure you've come across people where you see they're decompensating, they're not doing well, and to have that conversation is a hard one to have. Or if you're having to confront hard truths about maybe their behaviors and the way that they're acting, because in some ways, obviously, you're probably similar to me. Like I try to make it a no judgment zone, but at the same time, you also want to send a message that, that this particular maybe behavior that you're engaging in isn't the most beneficial to you, that something that you're doing isn't that something that you're doing is actually having these negative consequences over time. So I'm just interested to know how your kindness impacts your ability to have those hard conversations. If you're willing to talk about that, I'd be very interested to hear it. I know that I've had to have a number of those hard conversations in my life, and every time I can do it in a kind way, it really does make a lot of difference. I guess back to the idea of how we cultivate kindness, I just want to encourage anybody who's watching that, part of the reason why we have this community is so that even though it's online, it's an opportunity to really flex that muscle of trying to learn kindness and learn how to be in community with each other. But I do want to encourage you, I think it's important that we have the opportunity and the ability to be in real life community with other people. I see this as one of the biggest deficits that we can get into in our lives, because we are so individualistic, which also means that we're much more isolated now than we've ever been. So, for me, I think, and you probably know this to be true if you've read anything, like the Surgeon General, he came out and he said that we're in the midst of a loneliness epidemic right now. And part of the reason why we're in that is because we're so siloed, we're so individualistic, we're so by ourselves, we're just kind of stuck with this technology that we don't ever really get out and we're not with people. And I will tell you that, I left the church for a lot of different reasons. One of the things that I do miss about being in that type of community or being in the church is the community. It's being around those people. It's having the opportunity to kind of interact and spend time with them. So, I think that Oh, thank you. Yes. No, Lisa is remarkable. Uh, I really, yeah, she really is remarkable, and I think that her episode on that episode on regret was particularly good. And she's somebody. I think the thing that I really resonated about with her, which I loved, is for me it's very interesting going to going into therapy. I've been in therapy, and then of course I've tried to help people, and I just love the way that she talked about you're here to move forward. Regret serves a purpose, and that purpose is to kind of tell us that something's gone wrong, but we don't want to wallow in that. We don't want to wallow in that because we need to move forward. And, I just love the way she said that. I've never actually heard a therapist say that in the same way, in the way that she did. And it really, like, that's kind of like my philosophy is like, we can sit here and we can wallow and we can look back at kind of what happened. We can look at the root causes. Like, I actually think looking backwards is really important, because looking backwards and understanding why you made a decision or how you came to that decision, that's important. But what's not good, as Lisa points out in that episode, is to just stay there and just say, well, I can't believe I made that decision. Well, that doesn't do anybody any good. You have to shift and you have to change. And that's why people go to people like you. And I think that, and I agree with you about this, that, if they can talk without feeling judged, because obviously you're dealing with people who, people are bearing their soul. They may have made huge decisions, made huge indiscretions. And so, if you kind of just take that in and say, okay, well, how does that, you're kind of just, you're a blank slate where you just listen and you're like, okay, like, well, how does that make you feel? And you just kind of reflect that back. That reflective listening really helps. But that the trust that you're building with people is so critical, because that's what helps them move forward. I mean, the same way that Lisa talks about, like, we have to move out of it, because if you know the root causes, then I really believe you have the ability to shift and change, because then you can change the behavior. Well, that's the benefit of looking back, is you can say, I now understand why I made that decision. I now understand why I did this. And now I can take the steps to correct it. And I think taking those steps to correct is a really huge benefit that, of course, it takes work and time, and not everybody really wants to invest that kind of time into it to be able to shift and change things. But, I'm sure just the fact that you have a great appreciation for Lisa, my guess would be that you personally are somebody who probably does a lot like her. You're probably building up this huge this huge well of trust in people's lives, and you're able to help them move forward. You're probably really able to give them the ability to have the tools they need to make the right kind of decisions, and to hopefully motivate them to do better in their lives. So I just want to, I don't know who you are, but I just want to say thank you for being a therapist who cares and loves people, and gives them the ability to work through some of those problems, because I know how important that is and how many people lack that in their lives. So for you to be able to provide that for them is just a huge benefit. And the fact that you've dedicated your life to that, I just want you to know how incredibly important that is with the needs that we have in our world, particularly with people, I think, feeling so maybe out of control in their lives and feeling siloed and not having community. So again, I just want to encourage anybody who watches this ultimately that having a community that you can invest in, it's so very important, because just being in that community, being with each other, and then ultimately it's through that community, through that friction, that you're going to develop that empathy and that sympathy and that kindness and understanding that's going to make life a lot better. So, I feel like that's kind of what I wanted to say. If there's anything else, that you wanted to say, you're welcome to say it. But I appreciate you interacting with me, and it's really a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. And for anybody who might watch this after the fact, I'd be interested to read your comments, and we can respond to them later in the next broadcast next Wednesday when we come back. But again, just to kind of recap where we are. You're very welcome. Very welcome. I just want to say, let's try not to wear the masks. So let's take off the masks. If you feel like the person you are on the outside is not representing the person you are on the inside, you got to remove the mask. You want to go and you want to talk to somebody who's a therapist, maybe, to work on some of that internal stuff. We want to flex that muscle of being in community. We want to learn that empathy. And I just think it's really, really important for us to value kindness as a way forward, because it is in short supply today. It's the reason why our society is so very different than it was. I mean, just as an example, I talked about how the 1960s and 70s, that was like the peak, like the 60s was the peak of communalism. Well, the 50s and 60s, that was the time when politicians worked so closely together. Like, they really did work together. They may have disagreed, but they worked together. Today, it barely happens. So we need that sympathy and empathy in our lives, because if we don't, our society is literally going to be pulled apart at the seams, and nobody wants that. So again, thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you all next week. And again, I just greatly appreciate it. Appreciate you all being a part of this. If there's any kind of contribution you want to make, let me know. You're welcome to do so. There's a Venmo on there. But I just want to say thank you for even being here, because that really is what matters most to me, is the fact that you're present. That means a lot to me. And